There is no vaccine for that. There's no vaccine to create the best culture on your team or throughout your organization. There's no magic pill that people can take that just creates a wonderful team chemistry or chemistry between relationships, or a vaccine that makes all the problems throughout your organization go away. Welcome back to The Thermostat with Jason Barger. If you're currently on a commute, a walk, or just a micro break in your day, glad you're making time to step back, to think, and to reflect on the next steps on your journey. I've never been more convinced. The best leaders and team cultures in the world are the ones that make time to step back and calibrate their thermostat. I hope today's conversation leaves you feeling grounded and inspired. Now let's dive into today's topic to engage our minds and hearts in order to authentically lead and create compelling cultures wherever we are in the world. There is no vaccine for your team or company culture. There's no vaccine for your family culture, for your community culture, or for the culture of our world. There is no vaccine for that. I'll explain. Hey, everybody. Welcome back. It's Jason. Welcome back to Season 3 of the podcast. 2020 has been a strange, disorienting, unsettling, scary, but also hopeful in some ways that positive change is to come. It's been a time to step back, to listen, to learn, to think, certainly to plan, to just be, and hopefully to grow. These are historical times that we are living through, and I'm excited for what is to come on the podcast here in this season. In the coming weeks, there are going to be messages. There are amazing conversations that I'm lucky to have some people, some great voices joining the podcast, some nuggets of thought-provoking stuff that will hopefully mean something to you. And all of this, the hope is that it continues to add value to the journey of your life, your career, as you navigate your way through all of this. As always, it's my hope with these podcasts that they give you something to think about each week, to engage your mind and heart, and to help you lead with intentional action. And so thank you for keep listening to Season 3. If during the pandemic or the quarantine you've gone back and listened to Seasons 1 and 2, that's awesome. I'm so glad. Been getting amazing feedback. But for Season 3, again, thank you out there for everybody. Keep listening. Thank you for everybody out there who shares the podcast with people in your life and throughout your career that ought to be a part of these conversations. Thanks for everybody that takes the time to rate and, of course, leave 5 stars. For a nice review. All of those kind of things help amplify the messages of this podcast even further into the world and to have a further reach out there. So thanks for everybody who actually takes the time to rate, review, share this podcast, recommend it. That means a whole lot. So thank you so much. At this time in 2020, many people are starting back to school. As I'm recording this podcast, my family, we just started back to school this week. Yes, strangely, we are online for the first month of school, and so we're back in this kind of distance learning environment. Still, there are many cancellations in the world, cancellations of activities and things that everybody was hoping to do. Of course, there's still the daily tracking of COVID cases and watching the spread of this pandemic. And during all of this, there have been many experts that continue to cling to the strategy that someday there'll be a vaccine that will solve all of this. Someday there will be a vaccine that will solve all of this. And of course, the hope is that's true. And the hope is that, and there's dollars being invested in this. There's experts, there's companies. The pursuit to find a vaccine is certainly taking place right now. And many people are clinging to this idea that the vaccine is going to be the thing that's going to help us get past all of this. And whereas, depending on how you feel about that, that may be true from a pandemic perspective. It may be true that the vaccine is going to be truly what gets us past this in the end. But even though there's going to be challenges even with that, because studies have shown that a couple things have to happen. One, the vaccine has to actually be effective, which, again, thank you to all the people out there that are experts that are trying to solve this problem and to create a vaccine that will actually be effective. But then also studies have shown that in order for it to have an impact and really not even eradicate, but I think slow down this pandemic significantly, that studies have shown that over 70% of the people will need to get the vaccine, when surveys show that only about 50% of people say they would actually get the vaccine. So there's no guarantees with any of this. But still, it's a strategy that many experts and many people are deploying of someday there will be a vaccine that clears all this up. And that may be true from a health perspective for the pandemic. But for the purposes of this podcast, and certainly our talk about authentic leadership and creating team and organizational culture and the culture of groups of people throughout the world, from that perspective, this isn't a strategy. And again, I'm not talking about health, but I'm talking about creation of culture on a team, chemistry on a team or throughout an organization. There is no vaccine for that. There's no vaccine to create the best culture on your team or throughout your organization. There's no magic pill that people can take that just creates a wonderful team chemistry or chemistry between relationships, or a vaccine that makes all the problems throughout your organization go away. There's no secret button you can push or one declaration that can be made by your CEO or the leader of the team. We know this, that shaping culture isn't an instantaneous thing. There is no magic vaccine that just makes your company culture wonderful and makes people be aligned. So culture shaping has and always will be a dynamic and ongoing process. Culture shaping has always been this way and will always be this way. That in the culture of your team and your organization, it's a dynamic, ongoing process that is shaped moment by moment every single day by everyone in your ecosystem. And so certainly this resonates with us when we think about the pandemic as a metaphor, is that never before has it been so clear to us that my behavior impacts your health and your behavior impacts my health. Well, outside of just the health of this, every culture, every team and organizational culture is also dependent moment by moment every single day by everyone in your ecosystem. And if you've listened to this podcast in the past, or you've read my books, or you've heard me speak, or I've consulted with your organization, then you know as we're proactively shaping team and organizational culture, we talk about that culture is shaped moment by moment every single day by the way we think, act, and interact. Think, act, and interact. And that culture is being created moment by moment every day. And if you've listened to some of the old podcasts that I've done, or if not, go back and listen to the one where I talk about the 6A process of leading change. The 6A, what is that process that we go through to lead the kind of change and develop and proactively shape the culture we want? That it all follows the same pattern. There's an actual framework and pattern of how we shape culture and how we lead the kind of change we want. Or another episode that I did where I talked about the cultural ecosystem that we all have in our organization, the different players involved, the different kinds of people that we have around us, and how they all are at play in creating our organizational and team culture. So there are three things that we need to remember about culture during the times that we're in. Again, we're in this time of strange pandemic. And again, there's no magic vaccine for your organization. But in the midst of these times when we're all trying to navigate our way through all this uncertainty, all this ambiguity, and there are all these things that are swirling and seem to be out of our control, the best leaders, teams, and organizations are the ones that are proactively shaping their culture, bringing people together, and still thinking about how do we shape the culture that we want. And so there's three things that we need to remember about culture during the times that we're currently in right now. One is it's intentional. Creating culture is intentional, and in my opinion, it's never been more important than it is right now. As I've been working with teams and organizations over the last, a few months, or the way that I've observed people over the last few months, what I've observed is that many leadership teams rose to the level of the occasion in March, April, and May into June. Leadership teams that were, as soon as this global pandemic hit, they really raised their level of leadership. They went, to the ends of the earth. It seemed like they're working overtime to find solutions, new safety protocols. How do we care for our people? Everybody swung into action, and it was all hands on deck. And what I've noticed with leadership teams lately is that many of them right now are tired. They're stressed out. There's anxiety is at an all-time high with uncertainty politically, economically, race relations, and this search for social justice and this virus that we can't see. And I think many people in the back of their minds and many leaders and teams assumed that if we just got to 4th of July, that all of this would be behind us. And now, if you remember from a past podcast, I talked about the fact that we're realizing that we're in the midst of a marathon and not a sprint. And so the reality is the best leaders, teams, and organizations right now are realizing that we have to, they're diving into an intentional strategy to invest in culture during these times. The saying, never waste a crisis. Never waste a crisis. The best teams and organizations, as I'm seeing, are the ones that they are realizing, even though they're tired, there's anxiety is high, this is the time to not waste the crisis and to take the opportunity to intentionally shape the culture that you want during these times. And so bringing your people together remotely, virtually, all of that has been so important to make sure that you're having the conversations that are the currency for change and walking through that 6A process for leading change that I've talked about in past episodes or wrote about in my book, Thermostat Cultures. The second thing that I'll just remind us of about culture in these times is that, even though we're remote, virtual is what we've got. There are a number of companies and organizations that are starting to have smaller group gatherings. I've certainly been in person with many leadership teams lately that are 20-person or less groups where we're socially distanced, masks up, but we're still bringing people together to make sure that we are aligning our thinking and our strategy and how is it that we're reaching out and caring for people and helping them navigate their way through this. But even for those that are remote or geographically challenged, we need to make sure that we are engaging people virtually and using the technology to reach out. Forbes recently reported that 79% of remote workers are actually preferring that video conferencing to help them connect. And Gallup is showing that the highest level of stress that employees right now, Gallup is saying that their research is showing that the highest level of stress on remote workers is what they're experiencing right now. The remote workers are experiencing the highest level of stress that they ever have. So we need connection. And so oftentimes in this virtual world where people are isolated or remote and we're checking in to certainly do reports and updating and sales stuff and all these teams are running a million miles a minute, we need to make sure we're also creating times as teams to connect, to build connection with our teammates, to even though it's different from sitting face to face with each other, we're still being able to see, thankfully, through a computer screen, but we still need to make sure that we're taking the time to build those connections, to engage the minds and hearts of our people, and also to show them support, to show the people on our team support, and to help them understand and hear that they are appreciated and that they're making a valued contribution. I keep saying this to teams and organizations. There is going to be a time in the not so distant future where there's going to be power in congregating. There's going to be power in bringing everybody together. And at some point where we're going to be able to be in the same room and have those large group gatherings, large company meetings, large conferences, there will be time in the future when we're able to do that again. And there's going to be power and energy in the room. But until then, we've got to create that kind of energy And we got to use the virtual connections to build those connections, that engagement, to help people know they are supported, they're appreciated, they're valued, and also create an opportunity for people to be able to have conversations, to be listened to share their thoughts and how they're feeling, and then help people get aligned. What are the next things, actions that are within our control? So we got to take advantage of those remote and virtual conversations. The third thing that I would just reiterate on this pod for today is that language drives behavior. You've heard me say that in the past, that in culture shaping, language drives behavior. Well, now is the time. What I'm seeing with a lot of teams and organizations, again, don't waste a crisis. Now is often a time, and I've been doing this with some companies recently, now is the time to revitalize that core values language and to look at it. And to have those conversations that are the currency for change, and to be looking at it and saying, what is the culture that we need in order to navigate our way through what we're currently experiencing? But what is that culture that we need to create? Not just what we do, but how we do it as a team and organization. What does that look like for the future? And how do we begin to make those connections and those links to action and behavior? I've used the image of a windshield, looking out the windshield of a car rather than the rearview mirror. And certainly over the last few months, we've needed to look out that rearview mirror to remember where we've been. What are the things we've been experiencing? What are those obstacles that have come up? And certainly we've had to make sense of it, but we've also need to shift our eyes from the rearview mirror of where we've just been to out that windshield. And even though right now in the world that it's quite foggy out that windshield, and there are many obstacles still in front of us for your team, for your organization, the conversation about how are we committed to traveling on the road ahead, that clarity around core values and how we're committed to respond and the seeking of solutions together will help us navigate our way through this even better. So as always, I want to leave you with some questions to ponder. Some questions for you to think about for your own team, your own organization. Again, there's no magic vaccine that's going to just help you all get through this or instantly make your team or company culture better. But if we're willing to travel with each other along the way and get clear on some of these things and seek solutions together, we will navigate our way through the fog and the obstacles that are on our path. So a couple of questions to ponder along the way. How would you articulate the team and company culture that you need right now? How would you articulate the team and company culture that you need right now? What is your intentional strategy to co-create that culture? To not just hope for a strategy that someday there's going to be a magic vaccine, but what is your intentional strategy to help your people and to co-create the team and culture that you want? And do you need support and a plan to re-engage your team? Instead of everybody being scattered and isolated, do you need support and a plan to help bring your people together to reconnect and to re-engage your team? And if so, what's your plan to do that? Remember, there is no vaccine or magic bullet for creating your team and organizational culture. It takes intentional design, intentional action. We have to be the thermostat. Thank you for listening to today's podcast, and I hope the messages and questions stimulate positive change along your path. As always, if these messages resonate with you and add value to your life, I hope you'll help amplify them throughout the world. Please rate, comment, and share on whatever podcast or social media platform you're using. And share this podcast with the people in your life or work who should be part of these conversations. That way, this spirit does, in fact, spread. If these messages or developing leaders and culture would be helpful to your organization, or you have a question or comment about this podcast, please contact us at jasonvbarger.com. And remember, we all are ambassadors for the culture we want to create in our life and work. We have to own the vision we want to be a part of. The future of leadership is you, is me, is us. Be a thermostat.